Welcome to Faith, Fiction, and Folklore, or as we like to call it, the Tri-F podcast, where we try not to mess the podcast up. You might be wondering, if you've been following our podcast here lately, where in the world Trevor and Cody are. Well, that is my fault. Over the weekend, my computer crashed, and we weren't able to do the podcast. Fortunately, we record a little bit ahead, but we still needed to do a podcast this week to stay on schedule. So I decided to go ahead and record one on my own since this entire situation is my fault. So, by providence, the congressional hearing for UFOs on Capitol Hill took place recently, and Twitter has been going nuts about it, or X has been going nuts about it. So I thought I would do a reaction video on the congressional hearing. Now, I should start off by saying I don't even know why these people have these hearings. It's not like the Pentagon is actually going to tell the truth on anything with regard to these subjects. I'm assuming, and I've watched a little bit already, and it seems like there's some whistleblowers in the hearing. But the whole thing with this is, if the government's allowing people to come out with this stuff now, it probably means that it's either a distraction or some kind of just nonsense or line or some sort of propaganda. I think there's some sort of propaganda going on. I don't think this is the disclosure that everybody wants. But we'll see. I'm not very optimistic, but we'll see. Personally, I think this is going to be a giant waste of time, but Twitter has decided that this is the subject the UFO community and the conspiracy theory community, if you want to use that term, is talking about. They've decided it's interesting, so we're going to talk about it and just see if anything interesting develops. So, with all that being said, let's get into it.
Or high water. On that score, I want to thank our witnesses for being here. We have before us a panel of individuals accomplished in the military, in civilian government, in science, and in journalism. Some of the testimony you will hear them deliver today does not reflect well on influential individuals and agencies within the U.S. federal government and perhaps some of our contractors. It's never easy to present such information publicly. So I appreciate our witnesses voluntarily agreeing to being here today. This hearing is intended to help Congress and the American people to learn the extent of the programs and activities our government has engaged in with respect to UAPs and what knowledge it has yielded. This includes, of course...
I wouldn't be very optimistic about that actually happening, but I've already kicked that dead horse.
Any knowledge of extraterrestrial life or technology of non-human origin. If government-funded research on UAPs has not yielded any useful knowledge, we also need to know those facts. Taxpayers deserve to know how much has it been invested, how much has been spent. They shouldn't be kept in the dark to spare the Pentagon a little bit of embarrassment. The reality is, despite their enormous taxpayer-funded budgets, the transparency of the Defense Department and the intelligence community have long been abysmal. The Pentagon has failed 6 consecutive audits. In fact, it's never actually passed one. Adding to this is a runaway overclassification of documents and materials, a reluctance to declassify materials when appropriate, and at times an outright refusal to share critical information with Congress. In short...
Personally, I don't think that has anything to do with UFOs. I think that has more to do with the fact that they're spending the money on things you probably wouldn't be very happy with them spending money on, such as elaborate parties and other such wasteful items. I should also take this moment to add that from what I understand of YouTube's copyright laws, this has to be properly transformative. So I do have to interrupt the video every so often and add some sort of commentary, which I'm sure I won't have any shortage of thoughts on, but I just want to make that clear. That's why we are stopping and going as much as we are. So anyway, we'll go on.
It's not a track record that instills trust.
No, not at all.
So Congress has tried in recent years to lift the veil and find out if information about UAPs is being withheld.
And they've had
not
zero
only from
success.
the American public, but also from their elected representatives in Congress. Part of the transparency effort was legislation created in the Pentagon, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or AARO, but the new office is struggling to get its footing. A recent statutorily required report from AARO, intended to illuminate the government's historic assessment of UAPs, was heavily criticized by those seeking UAP transparency. The report has stoked suspicions AARO is unable, or perhaps unwilling, to bring forward the truth about the government's activities concerning UAPs. I'm disturbed that AARO itself lacks transparency. Even its budget is kept from the public. So if there is no there, then why are we spending money on it, and by how much? Why?
They've got to have their parties, guys. I mean, come on. The drugs aren't going to pay for themselves.
The secrecy, if it's really no big deal and there's nothing there, why hide it from the American people? Because I'm not a mathematician, but I can tell you that doesn't add up. I expect some of our witnesses to share their...
The answer is hedonism. Hedonism. Okay, there might be UFOs. I don't know. I should probably go ahead and say that. I'm not a skeptic of UFOs. I really don't have a strong opinion about it one way or the other. But pointing, like the basic logic that you are pointing to the mysterious money dump, or the void where our money supposedly goes, like pointing to the spending is not exactly a good metric, because these government's basically one giant embezzlement racket. And they're using it to enrich themselves. They're buying stocks. They're having parties. They're doing all this wonderful stuff. The Pentagon's not any different. And not to mention, they've got all this covert stuff where they're trying to undermine other countries and things like that. So the idea that there's going to be disparity in spending is not really proof that there's UFOs or anything special going on. These programs are just basically, if you prefer, shell companies for these guys to channel this money through. So I'm not sure that's a particularly compelling evidence, but anyway.
Views on that AARO report. We will also hear from the witnesses today allegations of UAP-related misinformation and disinformation by government officials, of which they are personally aware and directly experience. And we will hear testimony today concerning recent revelations about a purportedly secret UAP program whose existence and findings may have been improperly withheld from Congress. But before we get to the witnesses, we're going to have a few more opening statements from our colleagues. And one thing I wanted to add at the end of my closing statement is there is a document that will be entered into the congressional record today. Mr. Tim Burchett from Tennessee has this document, and we just distributed it to every member up here on the dais of this document. But this is going to be the original document from the Pentagon about Immaculate Constellation that Michael Schellenberger delivered to Congress today. So thank you, Mr. Schellenberger, for this information. We are all reading it in real time now, and Mr. Burchett will enter it into the record. But 12 pages about this unacknowledged special access program that your government says does not exist. So with that, I would acknowledge my colleagues, Mr. Garcia. I want to say, first of all, to Mr. Connolly, who cannot be here today, the ranking member on my subcommittee on cybersecurity, I want to say that I was greatly saddened to hear about the recent news of Mr. Connolly's cancer diagnosis, and I want to convey to him and to all of our colleagues, we wish our very best to you and a full and speedy recovery. And with that, I would acknowledge Mr. Garcia for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chairwoman. And I want to thank the Chairwoman and the Chairman both for their continued support and really treating this discussion and these hearings in a way that's bipartisan. I think one thing that's very important for all of us that are interested in the conversation around UAPs is that this is an area that both Republicans and Democrats, where we may disagree in a lot of other spaces, this is an area where bipartisanship is really important. And in fact, I would add it's critical that we all continue to work together in a way that moves forward with the truth and an important disclosure. So we're here to have
a shame y'all can't be bipartisan on that $32 trillion debt or whatever it is at this point. But anyway.
Partisan and serious conversation, I believe, about our national security. We should always ground these conversations in facts, evidence, and the data in front of us. I want to note that we have our witnesses here. I want to thank you all for being here, and note that also amongst you have folks that have also served us in our military. And I know that for many of you, this has been a difficult process, but I'm very grateful to have you with us today, and thank you for joining us. I also want to note that today's hearing builds on a quite, I think, also historic public hearing that we had many months ago that Mr. Grothman and others helped lead in this very same hearing room, where I believe we began a really important public conversation about UAPs. And so I want to...
Well, it can't be that historic because I didn't even hear about it. Not that I'm particularly immersed in this world, but yeah, you would think if something truly groundbreaking had happened, then it would have been somewhere on the internet. But anyway, hey, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it was historic. Who knows?
Thank him for that, and I especially want to thank Chairwoman Mays for her continued advocacy on this topic. I also want to start with some facts. We know that there are objects or phenomena observed in our airspace, as our witnesses will testify, and also possibly in our oceans. In many cases, we don't know what they are, and this is, of course, why we're discussing UAPs. Now, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution...
Okay, I'm just going to take a moment to say this because it needs said. It's not UAPs, it's UFOs. I'm sorry that the rednecks you guys made fun of, you guys being the government and the media, I'm sorry that, the guys you made fun of, those crazy people in the hills of the Ozarks, turned out to be right. But changing the acronym you people are using is not going to minimize the damage. It's UFOs. The rednecks were right. You people were lying or wrong. Just deal with it. Changing the acronym changes nothing. So you were wrong. The rednecks were right. Tough deal.
Office Aero has reported hundreds of UAPs that remain, quote, uncharacterized and unattributed, and which, quote, appear to have demonstrated unusual flight characteristics or performance capabilities and require further analysis. This is our own Aero office. Now, we shouldn't prejudge what they might be. I'm certainly not going to. We need evidence. But what we are detecting things, and we know that we don't understand them, and this is worth investigating. Now, the American people have legitimate questions, and I believe it's critical that Congress should help address them. This is about the truth and science and facts. Now, transparency and faith in our institutions is vital in a good democracy. Now, I'm proud to say that this hearing will build on that important bipartisan work, and I want to thank everyone for being involved, including members of our...
I should probably be a little... I should probably correct something really quick, because I think I just contradicted myself. Again, it's not that I don't believe in UFOs. I know people are seeing something. What they are is hard to say. But the fact of the matter is, these people have been seeing something for a very, very long time, and these guys lied about it. Or at least the government for years lied about it. Not this guy specifically, obviously. But the government in general lied about it. The media lied about it. This has been an issue for a very, very long time. And the military has known more than they've let on for a very long time. So the fact that the people that were made fun of in these documentaries and stuff in the 90s were telling the truth, were being mocked. People have been treated like pariahs for this subject for years. They have been bullied relentlessly. And what irritates me is that we're never going to get an apology for any of this. These people that risk their careers, their livelihoods, and put themselves on the line for what they believe to be the truth, the fact that those people were mocked, there's never going to be any sort of, okay, you were right, we were wrong. There's not going to be any kind of apology. That's the problem. We're going to have congressional hearings, and basically what's going to happen is when this evidence becomes undeniable, rather than apologizing to the people that were mocked relentlessly, we're going to have committees, we're going to have hearings, we're going to just bury everything in bureaucracy, and the Pentagon's going to try to get ahead of it and spin their own yarn about what all this stuff is. May have some elements of truth in it. Their explanation may have some elements of truth in it. It may not, but it doesn't really matter because the people that should be getting an apology and should really be getting medals for standing up in the light of so much persecution, they're never going to get anything out of this. They're never going to receive any sort of validation in the public. So to me, this is just kind of irritating. And honestly, if the government's involved in this, then the odds are they're probably lying about what they even have to begin with, and this is a smokescreen of some kind. Doesn't mean the whole thing's real. The whole thing isn't real. Too many people have seen too much stuff for too long. But I don't think we're going to get the truth out of these guys. But again, I could be wrong. We'll see.
Our committee. Now, in our last hearing in July, we heard testimony that a significant number of pilots of major airlines have witnessed UAPs as well, but have no real confidential way of reporting them to the government. We heard that commercial pilots who encounter UAPs may be hesitant to speak openly due to stigma or fear of retaliation. We also know that Aero has reported that, and I want to quote, that most reports still reflect a bias towards restricted military airspace, a result of reporting from military personnel and sensors present in such areas. And so the lack of ability for civilian pilots raises real safety concerns and limits our ability to understand UAPs. This is a particular piece of this conversation that I am very interested in. Now, our last hearing inspired us to introduce the Safe Airspace for Americans Act, joined by Chairman Grothman, Chairwoman Mace, and a bipartisan group of co-sponsors. I see some of our leaders from Safe Airspace for Americans Act here, and that would create a safe reporting for UAP process, which we want to continue to do. Now, members of both parties and senior officials in multiple administrations have now taken an interest in this issue. Mainstream media, in many cases, are beginning to take more of an interest in this issue, and we should all be proud to carry that work and build confidence for the American people. I believe we can always be more transparent. To me, this hearing and others are simply about the truth and getting to the facts of what these UAPs actually are.
I promise you
it's
that's
very
not
important
going
that
to
we show
happen
that
here.
Democrats and Republicans in Congress can work together to cut through misinformation and look for a serious and thoughtful way to have the discussion in public. Many of us have also called for additional public hearings to discuss UAPs. This should be a topic that continues on throughout the Congress so that we can gather more information, data, and work with the relevant agencies to gather more information. Finally, just want to add that those that are here on this dais, many of us have participated also in classified briefings as well, and where we have also gained a lot of important, I think, and interesting information, at least I personally have. And so with that information, we want to continue today's hearing, and I thank all of our witnesses for being here. And with that, I'd like to yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia, and I'd now like to recognize Mr. Grothman for a 5-minute introduction.
Thank you. Good morning. I'd like to thank our witnesses for being here one more time. This is a topic I've been interested in since 8th grade. I'd like to thank Ms. Mace for working with me on this topic and for making this a joint subcommittee
Me
hearing.
too, man.
Last year, the Subcommittee on National
Never
Security
made
of
up
the
my
Board of
mind,
Foreign
but I was
Affairs
interested in it.
held an historic hearing to understand the potential national security risk of unidentified anomalous phenomena, or UAPs. We heard from former Navy Commander David Fravor, who shared firsthand experience with a UAP he engaged while on duty in the Pacific. We learned from David Gresh, a former member of the intelligence community, who revealed the supposed existence of secret government programs hidden from congressional oversight. Additionally, former military pilot Ryan Graves informed us of the limited ways in which the military and commercial pilots can report UAP sightings. Since that last hearings, I've led several briefings with government agencies to deepen my understanding with these issues. First, the Department of Defense Inspector General's Office informed us that the Department of Defense does not have a streamlined process for service members to report UAP activity. Since then, the Joint Chiefs have implemented standards for UAP reporting across the services. The Intelligence Community Inspector General informed us that whistleblowers often fear retaliation for reporting mismanagement of how
Oh, gee, I can't imagine why. Whistleblowers getting punished for whistleblowing? That's not a thing. Nah. Edward Snowden just made it all up. No, that's fine.
sensitive government projects or information. Finally, AARO has expressed to the committee that, like any other federal government agency, it's faced challenges in its establishment, specifically in hiring staff to manage UAP historical records and coordinating with other federal agencies. While these agencies have been helpful to us in understanding the challenges that come from collecting UAP data, none of them have been able to substantiate the claims made at this hearing last year by David Grush. Despite our committee members endlessly questioning these agencies inside and outside of a skiff, I hope our witnesses today will be able to provide evidence and content that is worthwhile to our pursuits of eliminating government waste and increasing transparency. To help alleviate some of the roadblocks, I'm supportive of measures that were included in last year's National Defense Authorization Act to increase transparency and improve record-keeping measures when it comes to UAPs. But I believe there's still more work to go. I co-led the Safe Airspace for Americans Act with Ranking Member Garcia, which requires the Federal Aviation Administration to develop procedures to collect UAP data from civilian aviators. I look forward to working with members of Congress to see that this legislation and other UAP legislation crosses the finish line. I'm deeply alarmed by the reporting of the massive drone swarm that flew over Langley Air Force Base in Virginia last December.
Hey, hang on. When did that happen? Whose drones? What? Well, that should have been on the news. I mean, I'm a fairly informed guy when it comes to the news, at least. I didn't hear that.
Langley is the home of the 1st Fighter Wing, which maintains half of the F-22s in the U.S. Air Force inventory. Reports of this incident indicate these drones were roughly 20 feet long, flying more than 100 miles an hour at an altitude of over 3,000 feet. Yet the origin of these drones and their operators remains a mystery.
Well, how do you know they're drones then? I think it might be drones too, don't get me wrong, but I mean, let's let the guys talk first before we just jump to that assumption here.
This incident and other sightings near sensitive military installations highlights the complexity of the UAP challenge facing our intelligence, defense, and homeland security committees. Whether these phenomena are the result of foreign adversaries developing advanced technologies or something else entirely, we must take them seriously, investigate them thoroughly, and assess their implications on national defense. The repeated UAP sightings around sensitive military sites underscores the need for innovative defensive strategies beyond traditional measures. They also highlight the urgent need for updated policies to address emerging threats as well as more effective interagency cooperation and intelligence sharing. However, none of this is going to be possible without transparency. For far too long, critical information about UAPs has been either classified or ignored, leaving the American public and key congressmen without clarity needed to make informed decisions. Declassifying reports and fostering a more open dialogue about UAPs will not only increase the public trust, but also encourage collaboration between government, the scientific community, and our allies.
Because that's what we need. More collaboration between the government and the scientific community. It's not like we got a creepy vaccine out of that or anything. Yeah, I'm not sure that's a good idea.
Quite frankly, there's been things that have been kept secret that is, I think, old enough that there is no reason it shouldn't be released, regardless of any so-called, private information. A transparent approach will allow us to share insights, identify patterns, and develop new strategic defenses. As we continue to investigate these phenomena, we must do so with a mindset of protecting our country, advancing scientific discovery, and upholding the trust of the American people, who right now I don't think have trust, and it's just obvious.
Yeah.
I don't have trust. We cannot shy away from the unknown, especially when the stakes are so high. I look forward to discussing these matters with the witnesses today. I'm hopeful we can learn from the testimony and come out of this hearing with actionable ideas to advance UAP transparency. Actually, the idea is just to say, in my mind, go back 15 years and everything has to be released. I'm hopeful that we can learn from their testimony.
It's not a terrible idea. I could get behind that.
And come out of this hearing. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you. I'll now recognize Mr. Moskowitz for a 5-minute introduction.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Good morning, everyone. I first want to thank the chairs and ranking members for holding the hearing today on this topic and, again, having a second hearing. I want to thank the witnesses for coming forward today to share your expertise on UAPs and the need to build trust through transparency. But first, I want to mention...
Thanks, witnesses. Good luck, fellas.
You might be wondering why Chairman Comer has allowed me to be a ranking member today, but it's really only because our dear friend, Jerry Connolly, is not here. As Chairwoman Mace mentioned, he was diagnosed with esophageal cancer, and all of us on this committee know Jerry, and he's a fighter, and we're praying for him and hoping for his speedy recovery. So today's hearing marks this committee's second meeting dedicated to UAP transparency. I was pleased, as I know all of us are, on the bipartisanship that existed in last year's hearing, and even though we can't talk about what happens in the classified settings, the bipartisanship that has existed in those settings with the questions members have asked.
Get bipartisan about the spending.
Last year's hearing was a great example of open dialogue about UAPs, and we must remain committed to sharing information with the American people. And I think you see that commitment based on the people here and the commitment across the political spectrum. I personally have worked with multiple members of this committee, but I want to particularly thank Congressman Burchett, Mace, Luna, and Garcia for working on bipartisan pieces of legislation. In recent years, Congress has taken numerous bipartisan steps towards greater transparency. In 2022, in the NDAA, we created the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office to investigate unidentified flying objects. Following Arrow, along with ODNI, released an unclassified report on UAP sightings. Of the 366 sightings included in the report, 171 remain uncharacterized, with some of these appearing to have demonstrated unusual flight characteristics or performance capabilities. That's a nice way of saying we don't want to tell you what they are. In March, Arrow revealed a report on the historical record of U.S. government involvement with UAPs, which covered investigatory efforts going back from 1945 to the present day. Earlier this year, I joined Congressman Burchett to introduce the UAP Transparency Act, which would require the declassification of all documents related to UAPs with many other members of this committee. In fiscal year 2024, the NDA required the National Archives and Records Administration to establish the Unidentified Anonymous Phenomena Records Collection. This collection will include digital copies of all unidentified UAP records that can be publicly disclosed. This commitment in transparency is vitally important, and unnecessary overclassification has led to a void of information, which has allowed theories over the decades to foster. When the American people and members of Congress ask, are reports of UAPs credible, we're met with stonewalling. We're met with responses of I can't tell you, and in fact, we're met with people not wanting us to have hearings.
Yeah, because they want those theories running around. Because the theories are either all wrong, partially wrong, but they sure as heck aren't all right. So if you have a bunch of theories running around, well, then your enemies from other countries, presumably, they're not going to be able to tell what's actually going on. And if it's your technology, that's particularly beneficial. So you want the various theories. You want the confusion. You want people to not know what's going on and to jump to their own conclusions. That's the point. So that's not an accident or the result of incompetence. They stonewall because they want you guessing. That's part of their disinformation campaign.
We're met with people not wanting us to ask you questions. In fact, many of us were told not to ask some of you certain questions on certain topics. In a time of heightened distrust of our government institutions, I believe more transparency is not only needed, but is possible. And obviously we can respect national security limits, but we also have to provide our constituents with the information and oversight that they have tasked us for. As part of this, government agencies must maintain open lines of communication with members of Congress. And there are regular questions that Americans have. What are UAPs? Are they real? Are they ours? How has this technology been developed? How do they get funded? Right? And now we've seen, this has gone from a long time ago where you could discredit people because it's some guy living in a Winnebago. You're able to see people now, these are pilots, these are military, these are folks with serious backgrounds.
Maybe you shouldn't have judged the guy in the Winnebago. Maybe part of you guys' problems and the reason you're 40, 50 years behind on this is because you're always trying to trust the experts. You guys rely on these people that are supposedly supposed to be gatekeeping the information and making sure only the credible sources get out. You guys keep trusting those individuals instead of listening to honest people who have a lot more to lose in their community than these eggheads do, or these experts do, I should say. So maybe the problem is you guys were wrong to judge those people. Anyway, we are 30 minutes into the part 1 of this podcast. We're going to be breaking it up into 30-minute chunks. And hopefully Trevor and Cody will be able to join this by the end. And we'll be all caught up then. But we're going to wrap it up here, guys. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Faith, Fiction, and Folklore. If you did, we would love it if you would subscribe to us on YouTube or follow us on Rumble. We can also be found on X, Instagram, and Facebook. And we are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and iHeartRadio. Thank you again very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.